In this episode of FieldLink, we'll visit with Sean McCarty. Sean is the Director of Government Affairs for Helena. He will break down how the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act will impact growers. In addition, we'll visit with him about other key legislative activities that are taking place currently in Washington and how some of these bills may impact agriculture. Plus, we'll catch up with Jody Lawrence in Nashville, Tennessee for the latest trends with the commodity markets. And finally, we'll travel to Lincoln, Nebraska to visit with Helena agronomist Keith Mach to discuss the benefits for controlling weed seed populations with an effective post-harvest fall weed burndown program. This and much more. So stay tuned for FieldLink. Joining us today here on FieldLink is Sean McCarty. Sean is the Director of Government Affairs for Helena Agri-Enterprises. Today, Sean will visit with us about everything from the Inflation Reduction Act to the upcoming Farm Bill and the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act. Plus, we'll explore some of the industry's challenges from the courts to agencies and how some of these decisions will impact growers. Stay tuned for FieldLink. Sean, I want to welcome you to FieldLink. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into this particular role here at Helena?
Well, Bill, thank you for having me. A non-traditional approach. If you look at many of the individuals that have roles similar to mine within the industry and outside the industry, most of those folks may have gone to school for political science, or had an early interest in politics, perhaps clerked or worked as staff in a state legislature or the federal legislature or maybe possibly with the Farm Bureau. I came about it a slightly different route, worked in a variety of roles within Helena as a product manager, as a sales representative, as a branch manager, and then this opportunity came before me. And it seemed like it was a great opportunity to differentiate ourselves and have somebody who actually has lived the business and understands the business so that when we sit down and have these sometimes very complex and oftentimes emotional conversations about what's going on in rural communities in the ag industry, that I can look them straight in the eye and say, look, I've lived it, eaten it, and breathed it.
Right. You can relate to what's going on, boots on the ground. You've had that experience then.
Yep.
Awesome. And that's pretty important when you're talking a lot to whether it be senators, congressmen, maybe even governors from time to time.
Exactly. I think that the population directly involved in agriculture has diminished, and partly by technical innovation and efficiencies,
Sure.
But 100 years ago, where half the population, everybody's grandfathers and great-grandparents were involved in ag, that really dropped off over the 21st century. Post-World War II, we were down to a third, and today we're less than 2% of the population is directly involved in agriculture. So through no fault of their own, members of Congress and their staff just are disconnected, whereas maybe they were once the farmer themselves. Now they're 2, maybe 3 generations removed from the farm, yet they're still discussing policies that have as big an impact as ever.
Yeah, it is amazing to see, the general population is at least 3 generations in most cases away from, from that farm life, from that experience growing up in agriculture. Sean, tell us a little bit about some of the big things that are taking place right now. Boy, I tell you, you can't turn the TV on or check Twitter or anything, and the Inflation Reduction Act, it's catching all the news right now. Sean, I know your team's really been digging into this area. How is that going to impact agriculture from your perspective?
It remains to be seen. I think to act like I have a crystal ball, we don't really know exactly the impacts. That's because some of it is ideological in nature. If you look at many of the cost savings that have been published by the budget office and the White House, they're projecting cost savings from climate efficiencies and a reduction in natural disasters because of some of the green initiatives that are involved. But if you look at some of the tax revenue that's going to occur, or increase in IRS tax agents and a 15% minimum book tax for corporations. Those will have impacts on businesses. They will have impacts on ag. I don't know that they will be drastic, at least on the surface right now. At the same time, I think many of the things that are directly related to ag, such as the conservation spending, the climate smart funding that's in there, it's not novel. It's really just increasing funding to programs that are already oversubscribed. I think anybody that has ever been involved in any of the programs through NRCS, the EQIP programs, any of the conservation programs, countless times you meet farmers and growers that say, yeah, I've applied, or maybe I've even been accepted into this program. I'm going to put these acres or this farm or this field in, and come to find out the program maxes out and they're no longer in. And so what the Inflation Reduction Act will do is it's going to increase funds into those programs. So there will be a positive benefit there. Obviously, a lot of tax incentives for energy and green measures. The tax, I think, up to $7,000 for electric vehicles that are new. I think it's maybe $3,000 or $4,000 for used vehicles. Okay. So you can see where they're moving. And if you follow the administration, the Biden administration, look at who they've put in charge, whether that's former EPA Administrator McCarthy, John Kerry, even the folks that they put in charge of the National Economic Council, the head of that came from BlackRock on Wall Street. And that individual's portfolio was sustainability markets. So you can see where they want to move things. So I think there will be significant benefits there, not without some heartache on some of the tax increases and some of the measures that are going to take place. The one thing I think there is a consensus on, even in a bipartisan manner, is if there's one thing it's not going to do, it's probably not going to reduce inflation. But that's that was the language that was used to help kind of sell the narrative. So it remains to be seen down the road who the winners and losers will really be, other than some of the green industries in the short term.
And I think that's really going to potentially, because we're talking a lot of money here, that could really influence maybe growers or agribusinesses like ourselves on how we move forward with some of our purchases, our capital, and how we do business.
Correct. And one thing that you see right now is you have a number of states that are actually taking action against companies on Wall Street that invest and have certain parameters or certain restrictions on if you don't have the correct ESG scores and emission structure. And there are states that are saying, hey, look, if you want to do business in our state, you will strike those. So for folks like Helena, for farm businesses, we need to be as vigilant as ever and stay on top of it, because it's really a tricky game when you're trying to navigate a stream that you've never gone down before. You don't know where the logs and the humps are. And with sustainability and the green initiatives, there's a lot of good there, but defining what many of those terms are, even the term sustainability itself, is still an unknown. And so that's the challenge that we face.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. We're still trying to define terminology, and it's not like all of us in agriculture, we're probably some of the most sustainable, organizations, groups out there. We've been doing it for years. Conservation, my goodness. We know and understand the importance of conservation. It's not like we haven't done it, but we have to look at it in a different light and really try to identify how this will benefit us and how we have to play the game, quite honestly.
Correct. And that's the one thing in some of the discussions that I have with folks in Washington, D.C. and the various state capitals is really trying to explain to them, especially the new folks and the staff, not to belittle it, but many of the staff that work in these offices are 22, 23, 24-year-olds that have a very real interest in politics. Maybe they want to run for office one day, or maybe they want to work at an agency. But they are the front line. Those are the folks that you need to convince, because at the end of the week, that member of Congress or in the state legislature is going to go to their staff member and say, okay, who have we heard from today? And what were they saying? And so we've got to get out in front of these things and educate them, because if they're a kid that grew up in an urban area that's never been on a farm, that majored in logistics, and they're covering ag transportation, cyber terrorism, they have no idea.
Right.
And so we need to explain to them, look, from a conservation standpoint, trace it back as far as you want. There's no greater conservationist than the farmer. Folks that live on well water,
right.
Folks that fish in the streams running through their property, that may harvest the deer and wildlife that come from that farm. There is no one that wants to make sure that our resources are safe and sustainable than the American farmer.
Right. It's amazing. You've been spending a little bit of time in different houses and so forth. You've been in D.C. a little bit. What are you picking up from the Farm Bill with a lot of the chatter going on right now? Where are we at with that right now?
Yeah, I think anytime you head into the Farm Bill, there's two unique parts to the Farm Bill. That's the farm portion, and then there's the supplemental nutrition. Mm-hmm. Historically, folks referred to much of that as food stamps, but that's the food aid that goes out to folks. And that's a large chunk of it.
What percentage roughly of that?
It's close to 80. I think the last Farm Bill, 2018, it may have been 76% supplemental nutrition, 24% ag programs.
That's amazing. So a play on words, if we really think about it. The Farm Bill, thinking, this money's going to
is one quarter farm.
It's not. It's going to the average, I guess not average, but citizens.
Yep.
From a nutritional standpoint.
Correct. And so and that's gone down steadily over the years, and the ag industry finds itself somewhat in defense mode, mm-hmm. saying, "Listen, we know we're not going to get more. Just don't take any more away from us." Okay. If you look at the pressure, and we'll talk about it with the way weather patterns are shifting and crop mixes are shifting, the volatility. That's one of the big concerns we have is when it comes to crop insurance and some of these commodity support programs is knowing that the way weather patterns are shifting and the losses, 5 years, every 5 years the Farm Bill is renegotiated. That's a long time. A lot can happen inside those 5 years. And so there is a lot of concern. There's a large effort to get increased flexibility into some of those programs, but it's protect. It really is protect that funding. In today's climate with inflation where it is right now, the cost of food as a whole, that's going to be very difficult because if Congress does not want to spend any more money on the Farm Bill, I think last time it was nearly $900 billion over a 10-year period, about 430 over a 5-year period. If Congress doesn't wish to spend any more, but food costs more, and you look at it, you go to your grocery store today and you see the massive increase in food prices, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you're going to need more money to cover the supplemental nutrition portion.
Right.
Well, what's that leave the ag portion?
Right. Back to crop insurance, back to those fundamental things that we've become used to and from an agricultural standpoint.
Yep.
Wow. And when is the vote, or what's the progress right now for that?
Yep. So the Farm Bill will expire at the end of September 2023.
Okay.
So we've got some time. Generally, you want to get to work as early as possible. Then you get into the unique politics of it all, which is today Democrats control the House, the presidency, and by tiebreak the Senate.
Sure.
However, there's a belief that Republicans may win back the House. The Senate's probably an unknown. But when they believe there's a shift there, folks are very hesitant to show their cards. And so if you look at the House right now, you don't see a whole lot of movement on the Farm Bill discussions. In the Senate, they're moving along. They've had some field hearings.
Okay.
It's a bit more bipartisan. They know that with a 50-50 split, they've got 50 Republicans and 50 that caucus with the Democrats. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get it across the line. Mm-hmm. So regardless of what happens, we know that you're going to need votes from the other side. They know that they have to be bipartisan. In the House, 218 takes the vote. So whoever has the majority gets it. So you see the House slow play it until the elections happen and see where it lies after that. In the Senate, they're moving along. They're trying to figure out what their priorities are going to be. So we've got a little more than a year. Oftentimes it doesn't finish on time. All the best intentions to get it finished on time and not let it expire. But yeah, the next year will be heavily focused on Farm Bill in the ag world.
Certainly a lot of activity on the Hill over the next year in that space as we, position ourselves to have our say with the Farm Bill.
Correct.
Great. Sean, one area that has quietly seems to be getting some attention here, and I know it's caught some of our attention here most recently, is the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act renewal, the PRRIA. And boy, there's some big chatter going on in this area that could definitely impact most growers.
Yeah, PRIA is a function that was created about 20 years ago, and it was a way of generating maintenance fees and registration fees for EPA to approve of pesticide products that are coming through. Mm-hmm. It's in its fourth iteration now. It was last done, I think, finalized in 2018, enacted in maybe 2019. And it comes up every 5 years as well.
Okay.
So we are due, the same dates, we are due for it, expiration end of September 2023. And it's a bipartisan effort, usually. There are ag groups, pesticide industry folks, non-ag, but as well as the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, farm workers, and Sierra Club, and Defenders of Wildlife, and some of those groups. And really, it's an effort between those two groups to say, okay, we all want products to go through an EPA registration process, and we want that process to be efficient. We need new products on the market. We also understand that products that are currently on the market need to be reviewed. Moving into the next PRIA reauthorization, the new protocols that are at EPA are going to create some division. There's a new standard in place where the EPA needs to do all their consultation on endangered species impacts on the front end of registrations. We've got a deadline upcoming October 1st where hundreds of products that have been on the market for decades will have a determination. I think at one time, I think the number was 700 and some products.
Wow.
That go through a 15-year process are all due to have a renewal. Well, with the new products or the new processes in place, those products are going to have changes. Whether that means that they lose their registration or they see reduced usage rates or geographical uses, there's going to be some significant changes there. And so as we head into laying out what the pesticide registration process looks like for the next 5 years with an EPA, what happens after this October 1st deadline and we start to see what some of these new changes are moving forward is going to have a very real impact on what the industry is willing to compromise on when it comes to the pesticide registration process. We're paying more and more. It's a bit of a fee for service. The industry is putting forth a lot of the money that goes into funding EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs.
Sure.
Recently, we lobbied very hard to increase funding to the EPA, which is not very common. You don't hear the ag industry asking for increased funds to EPA. But what we've seen over the last decade or so is a significant drop in the staffing at EPA. And so today, if we talk to folks at Helena, folks in the Helena products group, and we say, what's your number one challenge? They will say, getting products approved. Products that used to be slight amendments that took 3 months take a year. New products, instead of taking a year, take 3 years. And so not only is that economically a massive hit, but agronomically it's a massive hit because we've got products that are solving problems, providing solutions that we can't get to the people who need them most. And so we've really got to focus on, okay, what can we do to help? So we went to EPA and said, what would help remedy these issues? We kind of did the analysis and realized, okay, we probably need to boost the funding on EPA. It's gone down further and further from, I think, 900 or 1,000 full-time executives or employees in the Office of Pesticide Programs to moving into this year, I think it'll be under 600. So there's just nobody there.
Right.
And so while we get it, EPA can cut both ways sometimes. We understand that if we want our products on the market and we want to bring new stuff onto the market, we've got to have those folks there doing that process. So we said we'd like to go ahead and boost funding, not astronomically, but above where it's been so that we can do our part and show that we're all invested in this.
And I think that's a wonderful thing when we say, as an industry, say, hey, we're willing to help out to do it right. And Are there any other industries out there that actually go to the government and said, hey, we're all in, we want to make this process?
I think that there are a couple here and there, but I think that the ag industry, one of the beauties of the ag industry is that it is bipartisan. We're going to have our fights. We're going to have folks that always feel like we should be doing it differently. But if you look at the legislature, both in Washington, D.C. and most of the states, those folks get along.
Yeah.
The ag committee may not be the hallmark committee, the high level committees of appropriations and ways and means, or Homeland Security or something that's really attractive. If you're on ag, you want to be on ag.
Right.
And those folks realize that Republican or Democrat, urban or rural, we all eat. Yeah. And the United States does a fantastic job of providing safe and nutritious food at an affordable level. Most countries, it's one or the other.
Yep.
We have found a way to balance that. But the way we do that is through bipartisanship and working together on acts like PREA and the Farm Bill and other legislation.
Wow. Lots happening specifically in that area, and it's certainly going to impact growers, in the next few years as we kind of navigate through that process. Let's talk a little bit about FIFRA. Tell us a little bit about FIFRA and why is that important to growers?
Yeah, so FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. Been around for a very long time and is the gold standard, at least in the pesticide industry, when it comes to regulating pesticide use. And so you have chemicals that are industrial chemicals, non-ag chemicals, those types of things that are regulated by the Toxic Substances Control Act. But FIFRA is ours. That's the statute. And for so long, we've said, it's one of the best in the land. Recently, the sentiment has started to change. Whereas we never wanted to really recreate FIFRA, we're seeing issues now where there's a concern that, maybe FIFRA isn't the defense that it used to be. You see states that are starting to ban pesticides or place massive restrictions on pesticides. California is the shining example. If you look at glyphosate and Prop 65, they have said, we're going to put a cancer warning on the label, and the EPA says, we've done our analysis. We don't find that at all. Don't submit a label that says that on the label, because that's not what we're finding. That's EPA, that's FIFRA, that's what we have authorized as our governing, regulating body. But you're seeing other states pop up and say, okay, we believe differently. And so there's a very real concern of, if this process that we've put in place and the FIFRA statute is no longer viable, then what changes need to be made?
Right. Do
we need to change FIFRA? I'll bring up the right to farm laws. Okay. I think people thought that most states had very good right to farm laws. I think North Carolina thought they had a really good right to farm law. And then we saw a nuisance lawsuit out in North Carolina years ago, and it did not end well for the farmer, who really, through their from their standpoint, and I think most of folks in the ag world and some nonpartisan folks thought, they're completely in the right. There's no fault there. What that caused was every other state to go back and look at their right to farm laws and go, we thought they were good.
Right.
But in today's world, with the changing landscape and changing attitudes towards everything, and sometimes emotion winning over logic, maybe they're not as good as we thought. And so that's where we are with FIFRA today. Is we've got to ensure that we have a risk-based, scientific, integrity-based system to approve the pesticide products that we put through there. We spend, $300-400 million and spend over a decade trying to get products approved. One might make it through out of the hundreds that get sent through. There's a very rigid and rigorous process that those products go through, and so we believe in that. We may not always win, but we believe in that process. But if we start tearing that apart, that's a bigger issue than FIFRA. That's a bigger issue than EPA.
Right.
You start getting into that concern of people not trusting any of the government agencies. And that's a very slippery slope that gets further out than just ag. But we've got to defend that at some point.
Now, I think you bring up a great point. We got to defend what we have and keep the integrity in place like we have had. And, it's unfortunate, the landscape, I think the chatter of, things outside of agriculture may influence this, and we certainly all have heard about, some of the stuff with whether it be the FBI or whatever. Those things certainly could influence and impact some of the laws that we're so used to, like FIFRA.
Correct. And that's where, and you have to educate the lawmakers, because most of your legislators are really lagging indicators. Mm-hmm. They're not the leaders when it comes to thought. They're representing their districts, and they're out there really trying to take the temperature on their district or their state and find out what folks out there are saying. Right. I'm not saying that you don't have a maverick out there that is, regardless of what his district or what her district or state say, they're going to tell you what they want to do. Mm-hmm. But many of them are reflective of that. And so we've really got to educate them to make sure they understand that, yeah, we get it. We don't always like the findings that a government agency has. But that's like your parents. Right. You didn't always agree with the discipline that they came down with, but you trusted, especially as you got older, you trusted that what they were doing were for the right reasons. Right. And we've got to have that relationship. That's what the founders and the whole purpose of the government is they're there to serve the people. We empower them to do those things. We fund them with our taxpayer dollars. And so we've got to follow suit on that. If we start tearing that apart, we've really kind of crossed over a line.
Yeah, definitely. Sean, that kind of leads us to the next topic here a little bit. We've certainly seen a lot of shift, and again, going back to the media and who you're listening to and what you're listening to, but the courts versus agencies. It seems to be creeping into all aspects of our lives today, but boy, it is certainly slipping into agriculture. How are some of these, relationships impacting us?
Yeah, I think, going back to the pesticide bans portion, that's one of the challenges that we have is that historically, groups that may oppose, let's take a pesticide or a class of pesticides, they might sue the EPA and say that we don't agree with your findings or we don't agree with your methodology. Or maybe you're seeking an endangered species violation, that you didn't evaluate this properly, and we believe that particular chemical may harm this species of plant or animal. And that worked sometimes, not nearly enough that they would like. And so a solution was found, which is, well, let's go to the courts and let's find a favorable court ruling, and that will force the hand of the agencies. And so we've seen that in the Ninth Circuit Court in California. We saw it with dicamba. We've seen it with some of the other insecticides that have been ruled on here lately, where the court finds, hey, look, we believe that you did not do this properly, so this needs to go back to the drawing board or it needs to be redone. And as a federal court, EPA or whatever agency it is, FDA, pick your agency, they are beholden to the finding of that federal court until it gets challenged, perhaps sent to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court takes it up. We saw that finding with some of the Roundup cases where there were some guilty verdicts in some states and some courts, but then there were some not guilty verdicts in others. The appeal was made to the Supreme Court, and the hope is that maybe the Supreme Court will take it up and you'll have some sort of at least definition there of what's going on. And really it goes back to preemption, federal preemption of pesticides. We lost that about a little over 15 years ago, but there used to be federal preemption where the federal law really was the law. States couldn't vary off of that too much. So the hope was we'd get some clarity there. We'd get those goalposts set. Right. The Supreme Court decided they didn't want to take it up. Mm-hmm. And so absent that, these findings that happen in a court really set the path. And once you've seen that works, you just take that chemical out and whatever other chemical you want, and you replace one with the other one and go forth and do the exact same lawsuit. And we're starting to see that happen more and more. It works. They found a process. It's kind of like when you find that play that works, and you just call it, Pee Wee football.
Yep.
You
There's that fullback dive,
right? That's exactly right. You know it's going to get you the 4 to 5 yards you need, even if they know it's coming. We're going to run it, and that's what many of the opponents of pesticides have really started to do.
Wow, it's crazy out there. Hey, tell us a little about PFAS.
PFAS. Yeah. PFAS. So this is it's a non. I wouldn't say it's an ag issue. I wouldn't say it's a rural issue. It's an everybody issue. I think that folks have started to see it. Friends of mine that aren't in the ag industry have started to ask me about it. That's when you know something's right. It's like it's like fertilizer prices. You know, when people that aren't in the ag world start asking about it, you know it's hit the mainstream media. I first heard about this probably 5 or 6 years ago out at a meeting with ag commissioners, and one of the ag commissioners said, "Has anybody heard of this?" The room was silent. No hands went up. And he said, "I promise you, this will be on your front doorstep, and will be one of your number one issues before you know it." Wow. And here it is today. I think that's probably exacerbated by the fact that our current EPA administrator is from North Carolina.
Yep.
And
tell us a little bit about PFAS. What is that?
Yeah. So they're forever chemicals.
Okay.
And so they are chemicals that are found in everything from firefighting foam to Teflon, your nonstick pans, but also your some of your coatings and polymers on table, any of your outdoor clothing.
Sure.
It's really the downside to them is they degrade very slowly. They call them forever chemicals for a reason.
Okay.
But that's because they're tough. And so what it does is whatever it's in, it allows to, it's not going to be degraded by sunlight and water and all these environmental factors that we have to deal with. The downside is they don't go away very, very quickly, and it's shown that they move in water sources. And so the EPA, that's gotten on the top of their list. I mentioned the EPA administrator being from North Carolina.
Sure.
One of the first opportunities that people really got to see was in North Carolina, I believe in the Cape Fear River Basin or somewhere out there, where they found these materials in the water, and they started saying, okay, well, they're leading to ill people, adverse health effects, a variety of them. I don't know that you want to define one particular, but a variety of them. And so people got really concerned. They started digging into it, and so they've said, okay, we've got these class of chemicals. Depending on how you define a PFAS chemical, there may be 5,000, 10,000, used in a variety of things. I think there were a half dozen or so just approved by the EPA last year. We put them in everything. And so there's many that are good. But they've identified some of these ones that they believe are really bad. The very tricky thing is what EPA has said is in many cases there is no detectable amount that is okay. In the drinking water, they've set it at 0.04 parts per quadrillion, which will hurt your brain to try and comprehend how small that is when most of our limits are set by parts per million or parts per billion, which is still unbelievably small.
Yes.
So you can't even test that low. And so there's a lot of concern with utilities and water industries to know we could be giving you water that has it in there and get sued, but we can't test low enough.
Can't even get that low.
And so in the ag industry, same thing. With all the irrigation water we use on fruits and vegetables and our other crops where our facilities are. And so the method to clean it up generally is to put it under CERCLA, the Environmental Response Cleanup Program under EPA, and make it a Superfund site. We see bad chemicals. That's a Superfund site. There were many bad chemicals there. Well, there's 2 chemicals the EPA wants to put under that and is in the process of doing that now. And there's no threshold there. So if we find those chemicals on your property, you're looking at a Superfund site, even if you didn't put them there. Because the way that works is that it's whoever's there. It's very loose in terms of who the responsible parties would be. And so it could be under your subdivision. It could be under your farm shed. It could be under the football stadium. They're so broad, and they've been used for so long in so many different areas. Airports, we're seeing a huge uptick in activity there, that we could have Superfund sites all over. And so from a real estate, farming, it's an everybody concern. And this is where we've kind of told those folks up there that, we understand the need to clean it up, the need to look at where they are.
To manage it.
That's right. But this might be one of those ones where you got to handle it a little bit differently because the unknowns are so great in terms of where they are, how far spread they are, and which ones are bad and which ones are good, that we could conceivably create a Superfund site everywhere.
Right.
So extremely concerning moving forward. That's not an ag issue, but it's an overall issue. But it's going to impact folks because there's a lot of focus on food packaging and where products that are going into human consumption are coming from and whether those have PFAS in them.
Well, and to your point, it will impact agriculture because obviously to crops, some of the things you just mentioned, food. it's a very emotional thing.
It is.
And when you start talking about PFAS and how that can impact our food sources, now you get everybody engaged, whether they're involved in agriculture or not. You're going to get, the moms with little babies going back to the Gerber days, 30 years ago. So definitely something we need to be paying attention to as we move forward in the industry. Sean, anything else happening in D.C. here that's on top of your mind?
All sorts of things. I think that's the one thing that I tell folks when they ask is there are a lot of things that get accomplished in Washington, D.C. What they don't tend to be are the things that you see on the evening news.
Right.
In many cases, maybe not as much as it used to be, but many of these legislators are friends. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're roommates. Many of these members, especially House members that are on a 2-year cycle, they're flying home every weekend. You catch any flight out of D.C. Reagan at the airport in D.C., and no matter where you're going, if you're catching that flight on a Thursday or maybe a Friday morning, you're on with a few of your members.
Right.
And so it's a labor. They're going back and forth. They're fundraising because they're running every 2 years in the House. Yeah. But they are there is friendliness up there. They do get along. They do find a way to compromise on things. Things do get accomplished. Mm-hmm. It's the macro things. It's the things that are polarizing that we see on the evening news that really create strife and create that negative sentiment. But I'd encourage people to be active, to go up there, to experience it for yourself, to read both sides. Right? Don't subscribe to one versus the other because just like some of the policies that have been passed lately. There are positives that usually come out of it. It's up to everybody to figure out what the benefit is to you and your district and your state and your country. But be engaged and if offered the opportunity to speak up and make your point heard. One of the old adages that was told to me when I first started this job was if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Right.
And in the ag world, we've got a phenomenal story. We've got a tremendous story that goes back to the beginnings of time, but we've never been great storytellers because we've been busy working.
Yep.
And unfortunately, many of the folks that want to work against us, their job is to be up there working against us. And so when given the opportunities to speak up, make your voice heard, and get your opinions out there and talk about what's really happening out there, I'd encourage everybody to please do it. We need more voices out there. We need to be heard. We're a smaller and smaller percentage of the population. We're easy to go after because of that.
Right.
So be loud.
All right. Well, Sean McCarty, I want to thank you for joining us on FieldLink today and sharing your story and the story that you and your colleagues do at Helena on the Hill and around legislatures and around the United States. And we appreciate your time today here on FieldLink.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Joining us from Nashville is Jody Lawrence to bring us an update on the commodity markets. Jody, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. It's good to be back.
Jody, lots of things happening in the marketplace right now. What's going on today?
Well, it just after last week's crop report that came out with a lower corn yield and a lower bean yield than expected. Bean yield was really the surprise because beans at one point were trading 80 cents off the lows after Monday the 12th USDA yield update. And that's really what's driving the market now because you always have a little transition between the September report and the start of harvest and before the quarterly stocks report comes out on September 30th, and then the October 12th USDA, which will have more actual field data from their harvested test plots, and as dry as it is around the country, and as the extra heat that we're seeing at the tail end of the summer, harvest is going to go very quickly. So in the next 3 weeks, we should have a lot of data from on-farm, from the social media sphere that everybody's posting to get a real idea if the USDA's numbers at 172.5 for corn yield and 50.5 for beans are accurate numbers. The trade and the prices are certainly trading like they believe them. It's just a matter now of confirmation from harvest over the next 3 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, Jody, it definitely is dry. As I'm driving across the nation, boy, this harvest is probably going to go pretty fast if things maintain this, and definitely going to impact some of these yields.
Yeah, that everybody I've talked to who is already in the field, the corn moisture numbers are 5-6 points below normal. So that's both. That really helps on farm, especially right now with the high cost of and the availability of propane and natural gas to dry it down, and the fact that all this corn is going into a cash marketplace that is where basis has been so strong, and they have really been actively trying to buy a lot of corn lately. So this should be a good harvest in a couple different directions for the U.S. farmer. On top of the quick dry down and the quick harvest, but also that the basis markets are going to stay stout a little bit longer than expected.
Yeah, definitely. Energy is definitely going to be impacted here with this harvest being a little bit drier. Speaking of energy, how is the energy market happening right now? What are you picking up?
Well, crude oil is trading just above $85 a barrel, and diesel fell all the way to almost $3.10 on the October futures earlier this week. It's bounced up to about $3.35, and I think the energy markets, with the uncertainty of the world recessions, and we're recording this on the 20th, tomorrow the 21st, the Federal Reserve meets to raise the rates an expected 3/4 of an additional point. And with that, you've got a lot of uncertainty and some high-level concern that their fight of inflation is going to drive the entire world into a recession, and that's why you've got crude down, trading at the lowest prices that we've seen in quite some time, and also with diesel. But I think if just like we've been advising everybody on these price dips, anytime you see it at 320 to 330, a little bit below where we are now, top off your tanks, because you just never know as we advance in hurricane season and also what Russia and Ukraine are going to do. Now that the war is not going so well for Russia, you have a real wild card of Putin with his being a caged animal and his back into a wall of doing something that could really disrupt so many things, and not just the natural gas supply going into Europe.
And Jody, as growers get ready for harvest time, is there any last-minute advice here as we move into harvest?
Just to watch your basis, as you move forward, the basis is front-weighted, as is the carry in the futures market, so that the industry wants your grain to refill the pipeline. So it's as good a year as you've had in between the early dry down and the lack of availability of some other things, to be able to just get it off farm as quickly as possible and not miss out on any of the normal carry that's in the market to store it.
All righty. Well, thanks for the advice today, Jody, and your insight on the commodity market. And we'll catch you next time here on FieldLink.
Joining us today is Keith Mach, agronomist out of Lincoln, Nebraska. Keith, tell us a little bit about you. Where's home? Where'd you grow up? And how long have you been with Helena?
Well, I was born and raised in Nebraska. I live in Lincoln currently. My wife and I, and our children, we lived in Fairbury for a number of years. So I've been out in this area, had the opportunity to work in the seed business for a while. Been with Helena 14 years and had a couple of different roles. One was product manager, and then also now in the agronomy side. A lot of experience after 30-some years in the business, and my role is to assist our locations, our field people who make the recommendations across the kitchen table, I'm happy to do that. We've got some great people making some really good recommendations, and we try to do the best and give the grower the highest return for the dollar invested through efficiencies and increased production. And that's what I like to do.
Keith, fall's certainly upon us. The harvest is wrapping up for a lot of small grain producers, and row crop growers are getting ready for that harvest. And today we're going to focus on, fall burn down and, where that whole, philosophy started and, how we can start to manage our weed bed, our fields rather, for the next growing season. And Keith, welcome to FieldLink.
Well, thank you, Bill. Yeah, fall burn down, that's been a term that keeps growing around the industry and in coffee shops about, this application. It sounds pretty aggressive. What is fall burn down? But really, everybody knows that it's just another tool in the toolbox to control the weeds that we're dealing with out here in the high plains and then moving east through the Corn Belt. Where the term came from, it could be as much investigation that I did. I think it came from really the small grain producers that would harvest winter wheat in that July time frame, earlier July or late July, and then about a month later or so they would go out with a program to kill the weeds that had remained in the stubble, and then also some of the later germinating weeds. And now with what we're doing as far as the hybrids and the varieties that we're planting earlier and earlier and getting earlier harvest, when we remove that canopy from the field, whether it be corn or soybeans, we'll still see a pretty late flush of some of these weeds. And not only the flush that came after harvest, but also some of the weeds that were small, that were within the crop. You remove that canopy and the sun hits it, and all of a sudden we take off and we'll get a smaller weed in as far as stature, but it still produces seed. And we want to keep that seed bank empty as much as we can to help us with our program come spring.
Well, Keith, I think you really hit something there. We've seen an evolution of, technology, different cropping techniques. You referenced no-till, and that's really kind of changed how we need to approach, weed management, especially in the fall.
Yeah, the adoption of no-till across the plains and then moving east has been for a good thing. It saves moisture, and it also reduces erosion dramatically. But it becomes an issue then because the weed spectrum, the species that we're dealing with, can change as well. And so we've what Grandpa used to deal with as far as major weeds has changed now, and we're having to deal with mare's tail, and we're dealing with henbit and chickweed. Some of those dandelion, those fall, what they call winter annuals, and we need to get something on in the fall because they're already germinated and sitting there come spring and waiting for that optimal temperature where they can take off, which is earlier than what we're able to get out in the spring to get ahead of them and remove them from the fields at that time. So a good program in the fall. Say a glyphosate in the tank for some any grass that might be there, but also a phenoxy, a 2,4-D, dicamba. You can use those. We have Helena, we have Barrage. We can put that in the tank. We have pre-mixes of, say, like Latigo Bold, which is both 2,4-D and dicamba. And we can take care of an awful lot of the weeds that are out there. But if you're going to do that, I would recommend a good adjuvant, an oil,
Sure.
A strong oil. Some of these weeds have got a thick cuticle, and we need that oil to break through that cuticle. And then also, because of the temperatures, typically they're a little bit cooler, and that activity on the leaf surface slows down as far as uptake and getting that active ingredient into the leaf. So an oil, such as, say, Fire Zone, will help break through that waxy cuticle, also take that AI and get it into the plant sooner so that it can move throughout and get to the action site and kill the weed.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, one of the big reasons we want to get after these weeds at this stage here in the fall is really to eliminate that seed web and ultimately preserve some of the fertility so that we're not having to rob that soil for next year's crop at this stage in the game.
Yeah. So through the years, I've experienced some interesting things, and even though say like I'll just talk about henbit for a little bit here, it can it'll eventually die and release everything back, but that's later in the season, and it's there in the spring of the year with a pretty massive root structure pulling moisture and nutrients from that top 2 inches, and that's exactly where the corn seed or soybean seed is trying to emerge, and it's robbing everything there. And so I've actually seen population reduced, planting through heavy weed patches of henbit and mare's tail, and then they eventually die back, but then created seed for the next year. So that's it's just a good practice. Everybody knows that you don't want to have weeds in your crops.
Right. And you mentioned multiple modes of action. There's lots of different tank mixes. Certainly we would encourage folks to visit with their Helena representative for their best tank mix for their farm and their field. But you referenced Latigo Bold a little bit there. Keith, tell us a little bit more about Latigo Bold and how that particular product could work, potentially be a tool for a lot of growers.
Well, Latigo Bold is a premix with a formulated through our lab, if you will, and gives us the best opportunity with the oil base that it is to be able to, number one, get to the crop, get from the spray nozzle down to the target weed, and then be able to be taken in. Gives us 2 modes of action. It's a 2,4-D. It's a dicamba, but those are specially formulated from Helena.
The Moveo formulation technology in that, correct?
Right. It's the Moveo technology that's in that product, in that tank mix that helps it get into the weed, translocate, and that's a big thing. Not only penetration getting into the weed, but translocating throughout the plant so that we get a good kill, a good response.
Yeah, and you also touched on the importance of adding an adjuvant into that tank mix. I know a lot of producers, are very comfortable with, it's all in one tank, or all in one can type of strategies. And there's a lot of companies over the years that have promoted that. But having that proper adjuvant, and you referenced a couple there, is really important for this particular application in order to get that quick kill.
Absolutely. So a lot of times we'll visit with growers and they'll say, well, I'm putting in a crop oil. And that's better than not having a crop oil. But when you really are wanting to get the biggest bang for the buck, you want to have an MSO, a methylated seed oil. And there's differences amongst the MSOs that are on the market. I'm going to mention one from us. It's called Fire Zone. We use that out of crop. So anything in the fall would be able to put Fire Zone in the tank. It's a product. It's an MSO. It helps with translocating that active through the plant once it gets there. But it's a strong product for breaking through that waxy cuticle. And also, we've done some demonstrations with it. When you start getting into those cooler temperatures in the fall and you have an oil in the tank, it doesn't want to behave like when it's 78, 80 degrees. And it might even slow things down. With the adjuvant that we're talking about here, Fire Zone, it's still very active at those lower temperatures. It's called solvency, and it has a very high solvency rate number.
Great, and that's something else that, again, producers out there across the country should definitely reach out to their Helena representative to find out which adjuvant best fits their farm.
Absolutely.
Fire Zone certainly is a great product for a lot of producers, but again,
Absolutely.
geographically, there's lots of different situations out there, and we have quite a portfolio for those folks. Keith, managing these sweet seed beds is really critically important. You referenced several weeds that have kind of evolved and become a bit of monsters, really, over the number of years. But, Keith, what are some other strategies to help with, I guess, the fertility and some of the other challenges that we've, I guess, really grown to face here, especially with biotechnology coming in for corn stalks? We're seeing some stalks that are very challenging for producers from a mechanical standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint. What are some things growers could consider when they're approaching their fall burn down system?
Well, man, that's kind of a hot topic this year for us out here, High Plains. We didn't have the winter that we were looking for to help break down that residue. And as we get higher and higher yields, we know that we're dealing with more residue that's left in the field. And if it's, it doesn't break down properly, it can cause us some issues in the spring. So when we're putting herbicide program on corn stubble, so that when we rotate to the soybeans, we can get ahead of the weed spectrum like I talked about earlier, we'll recommend, or at least visit with the applicator and the grower, and see if maybe a stock decomposition program would be beneficial. What that entails is a product, say like a humic acid, in the tank. We have a product called Agri-Enterprises. We'll put some 32 in with the application, maybe about 3 gallons of UAN, 3 to 5, a gallon of Agri-Enterprises, and then our application for our burn down, our killing of the weeds. So we're taking care of getting ahead of that weed flush in the spring, and we're also breaking down that residue, which has nutrients that are then released to the soil, and we can utilize that in the next growing season and recycle that, if you will, Bill. Recycle it back to the soil.
Definitely a lot of great strategies out there for fall burn down. It is a very important process to control our weed seed bank for the following year. But Keith, any ideas as far as how weather can impact some of these applications as we take a look at fall?
Yeah, the best thing that could happen is as we get into the fall, have some moisture, and we're a little limited out here in some of these areas, but we also have the ability to put some moisture on through a pivot. And it sounds kind of crazy, but listen, a number of places I've been where we've actually using the decomposition of our residue program, and maybe turn the pivot one time. The benefits coming back in the spring as far as cutting through that residue with the planter and the True V opener, getting the seed placed where we have good seed soil contact at the proper depth, it comes back in so many benefits as far as even emergence, space, and early season growth and uniformity. That's where we start off well, and we get our best foot forward for the production that we're looking for the following year.
Awesome. Keith Mach, thanks for joining us today here on FieldLink, and we appreciate how you help the folks at Helena help those producers produce a more profitable crop.
Thank you, Bill. Good talking to all of you. Good luck this fall. Be safe.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to download FieldLink on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on social media to be sure that you don't miss the latest FieldLink podcast episode. Plus, gain even more agronomic insight by visiting the FieldLink section on helenaagra.com.